Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, 2D real-time strategy, a puzzle prequel, and an SNES RPG that none of you played. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is March 17th, 1993. The SNES was home to some truly bizarre concepts for video games, and this is one of them. Released in March of 1993, was King Arthur's World. King Arthur's World is a real-time strategy game where you play as King Arthur. Your goal is to free the neighboring kingdoms by using your units to take down the tyrants. Create all kinds of units, from knights to archers to wizards to engineers of various sorts. This is actually more of a puzzle game than a typical RTS game. Think something along the lines of Lemmings, but with swords and sorcery. Each level is filled with dangerous traps and puzzles you need to solve, and it'll take you from locales wildly from normal forests to underground goblin caves to actual clouds. King Arthur's World is a game developed exclusively for the Super NES by the developer Argonaut Software. They're much more known for working on some certain other SNES games that you definitely know of, but we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. The 2D perspective makes for some surprisingly complex controls. Units automatically walk around unless you manually select each one to make them stop. Each unit has multiple functions that can be selected with different button presses. Even King Arthur himself will wander around, and if he dies, it's an instant game over. Thankfully, King Arthur's World is one of the select few Super Nintendo games that is compatible with the SNES mouse, making it much easier to play and much more enjoyable that way. In fact, King Arthur's World was the first new game that could use the SNES mouse that wasn't Mario Paint. In addition to that, it was also one of the first SNES games that supported stereo sound. I guess you can tell that developer Argonaut Software had a penchant for maximizing hardware potential. Developer Nick Halstead commented in a personal blog post that the creation of King Arthur's World came from when their team needed a graphics editor for the Super Nintendo. He also played a lot of Lemmings on his computer and grew up reading books like The Lord of the Rings and the Dragonlance series. And thus, King Arthur's World was born. Still, it's a niche game for a niche audience. Reviews of the game, such as from GamePro, while rating it highly, noted that it was only interesting to people who could handle slow-paced puzzle games. Surprisingly, in 2018, a remake of King Arthur's World was announced for mobile platforms, complete with a screenshot showcasing the project. However, as of this video, its game has not been released, and its website's domain has since expired. Speaking of weird puzzle games, also released on March 11th, 1993, was Fire and Ice for the NES. Fire and Ice is a puzzle game where you play as a wizard or something trapped in a room with a few fire enemies. You're able to create ice blocks or destroy them, and your goal is to defeat all the fire guys. The puzzles are primarily gravity-based, which mostly means making ice fall onto the bad guys. There's also an overworld map with 10 worlds, with each world having 10 stages within them, and you're allowed to complete these in any order you choose. There's also infinite lives, and you can freely retry a stage whenever you need to. Fire and Ice was developed by Tecmo, and is actually a prequel to another beloved NES game, Solomon's Key. In fact, in Japan, the game's title is actually Solomon's Key 2. I have no idea why they changed it for the North American release. Perhaps the most ambitious feature of the time was that there was a level editor. You could create your own stages for people to solve. However, the Western release removed the battery save function of the game, which meant that there was no way to actually save any of the levels that you've made. Also, I want to point out this game's box art. The imagery alone is whatever. Some ice blocks and a bunch of fire, got it. But it also had this green box that reads, "Warning, this game contains logic puzzles that may be highly addictive. Caution and restraint are highly recommended." Alright, you might be trying a little too hard to sell it here. It did get positive reviews, with Electronic Gaming Monthly liking it quite a bit, and while it's not exactly what people think of when it comes to NES classics, Fire and Ice has been included in the Nintendo Switch's NES Online Library. You know I like me some RPGs, but even this one is obscure for me. Released this week in 1993 for the Super NES, was Inindo, Way of the Ninja. Inindo, Way of the Ninja is a turn-based RPG where you play as a ninja seeking revenge against Nobunaga. Walk around town, talk to NPCs, and get into random battles on the overworld and in dungeons. There's also a ton of strategy elements, such as being careful with how you talk to NPCs, as some can join your party when you've built enough trust, or others will attack you for interrupting their conversations. Wander too long outside and you'll need to rest, often resulting in being ambushed right when you wake up. Battles also require you to move into position to get optimal attacks. Inindo Way of the Ninja was developed by Koei, who is most known for a trove of strategy games in the 16-bit era. In fact, Inindo more or less is tied to one of their other well-known franchises, Nobunaga's Ambition. Some of that strategy carries over, as you may start as a level 1 ninja trying to recruit friends by hanging out with them and drinking tea, but eventually you're more or less a general commanding tons of people to take over territories from Nobunaga. You can also notice that Inindo has a specific look to it, like it's not quite an SNES style of game. The character sprites look a little off, and everything has an almost too basic look. Well, that's because Inindo is a port for the SNES. The game was originally created for all manner of home PCs, such as the MSX and the Sharp X68. However, it never made its way to North America until this Super Nintendo release. Because of the nature of the port, though, it suffers on a technical level all around, from the graphics to the sound to the obtuseness of the gameplay. Even GamePro magazine couldn't help but point out that the presentation was severely lacking. Inindo did at least have this amazing magazine advertisement, partly because of the hilarious comic book sound effects splashing the top of the page, but mostly because, in the corner, it reminds you that Aerobiz exists. As for everything else that came out this week, here's Editor Dylan.
The final Nintendo game released this week was Milon's Secret Castle for the Game Boy. It's the notoriously cryptic NES original, only handheld, and colorless. Sounds worse, doesn't it? Well, it's actually quite the opposite. Hudson fixed the sluggish controls, added many new songs, offered an accessible inventory, easier difficulty, and even cutscenes? Jeez. Normally, Game Boy ports cut corners from their console counterparts, but here it's the opposite. Well done, Hudson. I still have no idea where all the secrets are, but at least I can recommend a better version than the one I was stuck with growing up. You ever wonder what Capcom's Ghosts and Ghouls and Goblins series would be like if it was made by EA? Yeah, me neither, but Risky Woods released on the Genesis all the same. It's a side-scrolling platformer where you constantly throw an infinite supply of any weapon you find. It even has upgradable armor that can eventually turn gold. That sounds familiar. Well, despite the similarities, it's not bad and it's still worth a try if that sounds like your jam. Another Genesis game that came out this week was Elemental Master, a top-down vertical shooter that's on foot, similar to Gunsmoke or Pocky and Rocky. Oddly enough, the game opens up with a twist. Spoiler alert, the big bad was your brother all along. No! Choose one of 4 stages, each representing one of the 4 elements: earth, fire, wind, and water. After defeating all the bosses, a 5th element stage appears where you encounter Lilu Dallas and her multipass. King of the Monsters is the final Genesis game this week, and is kinda disappointing. It's not bad, but it's pretty much the same as the SNES version, which we already covered extensively in last year's October 14th episode. Go give that one a gander if you're interested. A game we already covered this year was Simurth: The Living Planet, only the TurboGrafx CD version is vastly superior than the SNES version from February 17th. It's still intricate and overly complex, cumbersome and not very focused, more akin to a scientific learning program than an actual video game. But at least you could save in this one. We also mentioned this version likely got chosen for the Wii's Virtual Console over the SNES one because of a cutscene where the Earth talks to you. Well, here's a taste of what that's all about.
Modern-day Earth is ruled by some rather advanced primates called humans. I'm sad. So very sad. Life on Earth can't flourish when I'm sad.
That's a big fucking mood right there. 8 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1993. I highly recommend you check out Elemental Master. Apparently it's got the same composer who worked on Thunder Force 3 and 4. One song even got remixed and put into Dragon's Fury. The music is good, is what I'm saying. Now pardon me while I go watch the 5th element for the 50th time.
Thanks as always, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, King Arthur's World isn't too bad these days. The game alone is right at $20, and you can get a complete one for just over $60. Inindo Way of the Ninja released with a suggested retail price of a whopping $69.95. Now the game alone is about $33, and one with the box and manual is worth $90. This week's biggest value gainer, though, is easily Fire and Ice. A loose copy of just the game goes for $185. If you have the rare box and manual with it, it shoots up to $485. And that's it for today. Next week, another Bomberman, a Castlevania game, and one of the priciest TurboGrafx 16 games you could hope to have. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Rushmore Miles, Super Bunny Bun, and Alexander Williams. Please like the video and leave a comment down below and subscribe if you're new here. If you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. As a kid, I actually remember renting King Arthur's World because I saw the box at the video rental store, and for nothing else, I saw they could use the SNES mouse with it. And I already had Mario Paint, and another game that could use the SNES mouse would be awesome. So I played it, and it was too complex for my small, feeble mind, and I returned it the next day.